Case, senior dev, and unofficial team lead. Not a manager, just the guy everyone goes to when shit hits the fan. For years, my life was pretty damn good. Worked in a small but highly effective tech division of a larger, boring corporation. Our team was a well-oiled machine. Not friends who hang out after work, but we had that professional respect that's worth more than fake smiles. There was me, the organizer. I made sure the pieces fit together. Then there was Yosef, the old guard, pushing 60, seen it all. A coding wizard from the old school. Wrote code that was more like architecture than script. Zero tolerance for corporate BS. A bit of a grump, but you knew his work was flawless. He was the foundation of our entire project. We also had Ahmir, quietest dude I've ever met. Probably said 10 words a week, but he was our systems architect, a genuine prodigy. The entire back-end infrastructure, the stuff that made our product actually run, was his baby. He'd sit there with his headphones on, and pure magic would flow from his keyboard. You didn't talk to Amir unless the building was on fire, and even then, you'd send an email first. Rounding out our core group was Fabian, the FNG, the new guy. Young, maybe a couple of years out of college. Eager to please, smart, but still learning the ropes. He looked up to all of us, and we all took turns mentoring him. He was a good kid, just needed some real-world experience to sand off the shiny corporate drone edges. There were a few other people, some junior staff, and a couple of women who were decent at their jobs and kept to themselves, mostly on the UI/UX side of things. The ecosystem worked. No drama, we just delivered. Our big project, codenamed Odyssey, was a massive undertaking. 2 years in the making, and we were in the final stretch, about 3 months from launch. It was high stress, but the good kind. The kind where you solve complex problems and see real progress every day. Our old boss, a guy named Frank, was a simple man. His philosophy was, I don't care how you do it, just get it done on time and don't burn the building down. He shielded us from the upper management nonsense and let us work. A perfect arrangement. Then Frank retired. We had a few weeks of blissful autonomy. No manager, just pure productivity. We all knew it wouldn't last. The email landed in our inboxes a while back. Introducing your new department head, Caitlin. Included was a photo, standard corporate headshot, but with that specific, unmistakable look in her eyes. The look of someone who has a lot of opinions and thinks they're all facts. Her bio didn't mention a single technical achievement. No past projects, no coding languages, no systems architecture experience. It was all about her passion for building inclusive and dynamic team cultures. She had a degree in something studies and had led cultural transformation initiatives at her last company. I remember looking over my monitor at Yosef. He'd already read it. He just slowly shook his head, a grim look on his face. He'd seen this movie before. Day 1. Caitlin arrives. She doesn't ask about Project Odyssey's status. She doesn't ask about our technical stack. She doesn't ask about the impending deadline. Instead, she schedules a 2-hour introductory circle of trust. Mandatory attendance. We all shuffle into the main conference room. Caitlin is standing at the front, beaming. Welcome, everyone. I am so thrilled to be here and to start our journey toward a more collaborative and emotionally honest workspace. Fabian, ever the try-hard, was nodding along enthusiastically. Yosef looked like he was mentally calculating the optimal trajectory to launch himself out the window. Amir was just blank, a statue in a hoodie. Caitlin had us go around the room, and instead of our names and roles, we were supposed to share our current emotional state and what we hoped to bring to this safe space. It was excruciating. People mumbled things like, I feel fine, and I hope to contribute. When it got to Amir, he just stared. After about 10 seconds of dead silence, Caitlin clapped her hands together with a brittle smile and said, And thank you, Amir, for sharing that powerful, contemplative silence. I swear I saw a muscle in Yosef's jaw twitch. When it was my turn, I just said, My name is Case. I'm the team lead. I'm feeling focused on the Odyssey launch, and I hope to bring it in for a successful landing. Caitlin's smile faltered for a second. That's wonderful, Case. But we should try to separate our work identity from our authentic selves. How does Case the person feel? I just stared at her. He feels like the deadline is in 3 months. The mood in the room got very cold. very fast. The next week, the real changes began. All our morning stand-up meetings, which used to be a quick 10-minute check on technical blockers, were replaced. They became 45-minute emotional check-ins. We spent more time discussing the vibe of the team than the actual code being written. Caitlin introduced a new rule: no negative or challenging language. You couldn't say a piece of code was wrong or inefficient. You had to say you held a different perspective on its potential path to success. Joseph tried it once. He found a critical flaw in a new module Fabian had checked in. In the old days, he'd have just walked over and said, "Kid, this is a mess. It's going to cause a massive memory leak. Let me show you how to fix it." And Fabian would have learned something. The new way, Joseph had to schedule a meeting. He sat there, face contorted with effort, and said, "Fabian, I'm holding a space to honor your contribution to the codebase. I do, however, feel a disconnect with the memory allocation strategy you've chosen, and I'd like to explore alternative narratives for this function." Fabian looked utterly confused. Caitlin, who was observing the meeting, beamed and praised Joseph for his vulnerable and constructive communication. The bug took 3 days to fix instead of 30 minutes. Productivity started to tank. Then came the big one, the mandatory seminar. Unpacking the invisible knapsack, deconstructing toxic masculinity in the workplace. It was just for the men. We were all herded into a conference room for a half-day session. Caitlin had a PowerPoint presentation. It was full of corporate art of genderless, blob-shaped people holding hands. She explained to us that things like focusing on logic over feelings, a desire to solve problems instead of listening, speaking with authority, and stoicism were all symptoms of toxic masculinity. She told us that our workplace had been dominated by these traits for too long, creating an environment that was not welcoming to other ways of knowing. We were told that to be better colleagues and allies, we needed to be more feminine. She literally used that word, more feminine. This meant being more openly emotional, prioritizing group harmony over individual achievement, and yielding the floor in conversations, especially to our female colleagues. She said men have a tendency to dominate conversations, and that we needed to actively practice silence. I raised my hand. "Caitlin, I get the social points you're making, but we're an engineering team with a hard deadline. Sometimes the most efficient way to solve a problem is for the person with the most expertise, like Joseph or Amir, to speak with authority and lead the solution. How do we balance that with this?" She gave me a look of profound disappointment. "Case, that's a perfect example of the problematic thinking we're here to dismantle. The assumption that one person's expertise is inherently more valuable than the collective emotional truth of the group is the very foundation of patriarchal structures." I just sat back in my chair. There was no way to argue. It was like trying to debate the color of the sky with someone who insists it's made of cheese. From that day on, toxic masculinity became her go-to explanation for everything. Project is behind schedule. Toxic masculine obsession with deadlines is creating stress. A heated technical debate in the hallway. Toxic masculine aggression. Amir working silently with his headphones on. Toxic masculine emotional unavailability. The atmosphere grew bizarre. Fabian, trying to get ahead, really leaned into it. He started talking about his feelings of inadequacy during our check-ins. He'd cry sometimes. Caitlin loved it. She praised his bravery and vulnerability in every meeting. His actual code output dropped by 70%. But he was getting all the praise. The few women on our team were in a weird spot. 1 or 2 of them seemed to really buy into Caitlin's philosophy and became her enforcers, reporting any perceived microaggressions. Most of them just looked uncomfortable and tried to stay out of the blast radius, keeping their heads down and their mouths shut. Joseph and I developed a system of communicating through subtle eyebrow movements. A single raised brow meant, "You've got to be kidding me." Both brows up meant, "The project is on fire." Amir just retreated further into his shell. He started coming in earlier and leaving later, I think just to avoid interacting with anyone. His door was always shut. I tried to manage things. I acted as a buffer between Caitlin's directives and my team's sanity. I'd translate her corporate speak into actual, actionable tasks. I would take her demand for a more holistic and nurturing approach to our data security and tell Amir, "She wants you to run another security audit." Just do the usual. It was exhausting. It felt less like leading a development team and more like being a UN translator in a war zone. The cracks in Project Odyssey started to become chasms. Features were late. The bug count was skyrocketing. The elegant, clean architecture Yosef and Ahmir had designed was being cluttered with poorly thought out, collaboratively designed junk. We had a coding circle where instead of one person writing a function, a group of 5 people would share their feelings about how the function should be written. It was as effective as it sounds. Upper management was starting to get nervous. They didn't understand the internal politics. They just saw the red flags on the project timeline. They scheduled a major progress review. The big bosses would be there, VPs, directors, the whole crew. Caitlin spent the entire week preparing a presentation. But it wasn't about the project's status. It was about our team's cultural growth. She had charts showing the increase in emotional expression during meetings. She had testimonials from Fabian about how much safer he felt. Yosef, Amir, and I worked late every night that week, trying to patch the holes and put together a real technical status report, just in case. We knew a disaster was coming. The day of the meeting arrived. The conference room was packed with suits. The air was thick with that expensive cologne and desperation smell that senior management carries around. Caitlin started her presentation. She was in her element. She spoke with passion about synergy, empowerment, and breaking down paradigms. The VPs were nodding along politely. They love that kind of empty talk. It makes them feel like they're good people, not just ruthless capitalists. She finished her slideshow with a picture of a diverse group of people planting a tree. Then the VP of product, a sharp guy who actually used to be an engineer, cleared his throat. This is all very inspiring, Caitlin. But my team's reports show that 3 key feature integrations for Odyssey are over a month behind schedule, and the stability of the latest build is, frankly, abysmal. Can you speak to that? A dead silence fell over the room. Caitlin's smile became a tight, rigid line. Well, she began, I think we need to reevaluate our metrics for success. We've been focusing on building a sustainable and healthy team dynamic, which, in the long run, is far more valuable than rushing to meet arbitrary deadlines. The VP was not impressed. The deadline isn't arbitrary. It's tied to multi-million-dollar contracts with our clients. What are the technical blockers? Caitlin completely fumbled. She started spewing buzzwords that had no technical meaning. We're encountering some structural paradigm challenges, and we're leveraging our collaborative spirit to synergize a path forward. It was painful to watch. She was completely out of her depth. The VP looked around the room, his eyes landing on our team. He looked directly at me. Case, what's the real story? Before I could even formulate a diplomatic answer, Yosef spoke up. He didn't raise his voice. He was perfectly calm, perfectly factual. It was the calm of a man who had simply run out of patience. The back-end integration with the primary database is failing under load because the new API middleware, designed by committee, is fundamentally flawed, he stated, his voice flat. Second, the security module has a critical vulnerability because the approved patch was never implemented, as the review meeting was canceled for a team meditation session. He took a breath. And third, our core processing algorithm is currently running at 20% efficiency because a junior dev was encouraged to follow his heart and rewrite it, and no one was allowed to discourage his initiative by telling him it was a terrible idea. He finished speaking and then just sat there, looking at the VP. He hadn't said a single word of opinion. Just 3 cold, hard, verifiable facts. The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning. Caitlin's face was a mask of pure fury. Her eyes were wide, and her skin was blotchy red. She was shaking. She stood up, pointing a trembling finger at Yosef. This right here is exactly the kind of toxic, confrontational, and hostile behavior I am talking about. Her voice was shrill. This is a public ambush. He is creating an unsafe environment and deliberately undermining my leadership. She turned to the VPs. This is what I have been dealing with. A deep-seated resistance to change and a culture of masculine aggression that is sabotaging our progress. The suits all just stared, looking back and forth, between a hysterical Caitlin and a stone-faced Yosef. None of them said a word. They didn't defend her, but they didn't defend him either. They just watched. And in that moment, watching Yosef get crucified for simply telling the truth, I think something broke in all of us. The walk back from the conference room to our department was the longest 10 yards of my life. Nobody said a word. The silence was heavier than any argument. Yosef walked with his head held high, a look of serene indifference on his face. He had spoken his truth, and that was that. Amir was, as usual, unreadable, but there was a tension in his shoulders I hadn't seen before. Fabian looked like he'd just seen a ghost. His face was pale, his eyes wide. The corporate fairy tale he'd been living in had just been torched by 3 sentences of pure, unadulterated fact. Caitlin didn't walk with us. She stayed behind, probably to do damage control with the VPs. We all got back to our desks and just sat there. The rhythmic clacking of keyboards, the usual background noise of our office, was gone. There was only the low hum of the servers. An hour later, an email from Caitlin arrived in everyone's inbox. The subject line was, "Moving forward with mutual respect." The email was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive corporate jargon. It spoke of the challenges of open dialogue and the need to ensure all voices feel safe, not just the loudest ones. It announced a new series of restorative justice circles to heal the fractures in our team synergy. It never mentioned Yosef by name, but it didn't have to. It was a corporate memo painting a target on his back. I looked over at Yosef. He read the email, let out a short, sharp sigh that sounded like a tire deflating, and then began to type. He wasn't writing code. He was writing his resignation. The next morning, Yosef's chair was empty. He'd come in early, before any of us, and cleared his desk. All that was left was his old keyboard, a faded coffee mug, and his security badge, sitting perfectly centered on his desk. He hadn't made a scene. He hadn't sent a goodbye email. He had just vanished. Cleanly. Professionally. I found out later from a friend in HR what had happened. Yosef had walked into the HR office and handed his notice to the department head, a woman who was a known Caitlin ally. The HR woman apparently tried to give him the corporate spiel, telling him that his departure was a drastic step, and that they should open a dialogue to resolve his feelings of alienation. Yosef just cut her off. He told her, "There's nothing to discuss. I'm an engineer. My job is to solve problems with logic. This environment is actively hostile to logic. Therefore, logically, I must leave." She then tried to threaten him, mentioning something about how he needed to consider his professional reputation, and how leaving on such negative terms could be damaging. Yosef, who had been working in this industry since before she was born, apparently just laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. He told her his reputation was built on 56 successfully launched projects, not on his ability to tolerate fools. He signed his papers, walked out, and never looked back. The first domino had fallen. Caitlin's response to Yosef's departure was one of smug victory. In our morning check-in, she announced that one of our team members has chosen to move on to opportunities that are a better fit for his particular communication style. She framed it as a positive. This is an opportunity for us to rebuild with a stronger foundation of trust and collaboration. Now, the voices that were previously silenced can finally be heard. She looked expectantly at Fabian. Fabian just stared at his shoes, mumbling something about feeling a bit tired. The enthusiasm was gone. He looked lost. The real problem was that Yosef wasn't just some guy. He was the institutional knowledge of our entire project. There were parts of the legacy code that only he understood. He was also the most meticulous and effective code reviewer we had. Without him, the quality control net was gone. I knew it. Amir knew it. Even Caitlin, in her bubble of denial, must have had some inkling. She assigned Yosef's responsibilities to a couple of the junior devs, including Fabian. It was like handing the controls of a 747 to a student driver. The mood of the team shifted from tense to funereal. We all knew we were in trouble. I saw Amir later that day. He was standing by the server racks, just looking at them. He wasn't doing anything, just observing the blinking lights, lost in thought. I walked up to him. "Tough day," I said. He just nodded, his eyes not leaving the servers. "I ran the numbers," he said, his voice quiet. It was the most I'd heard him say all week. "What numbers?" I asked. "The project's probability of success," he replied. With Yosef gone, and with the current workflow inefficiencies, The statistical chance of us launching on time without a catastrophic failure has dropped to 11.3%. He finally turned and looked at me. That is an unacceptable level of risk. I do not attach my name to projects with an 88.7% chance of failure. He didn't say anything else. He just walked back to his office and shut the door. The next morning, my phone buzzed at 5 a.m. It was an automated email from HR. This is to inform you that Amir's employment has been terminated. His access to all systems has been revoked. He hadn't even bothered to come in. He'd just sent his resignation email sometime in the middle of the night. Logical, efficient, final. If Yosef's departure was the first domino, Amir's was the earthquake that took out the whole row. Amir wasn't the foundation. He was the entire load-bearing structure of Project Odyssey. Without him, we didn't just have bugs. We had a black hole where our back end used to be. I walked into work that day feeling like a ghost. The office was in a state of quiet panic. Caitlin hadn't arrived yet. The junior devs were clustered together, looking terrified. They knew they were being asked to do something impossible. When Caitlin finally swept in, she had a look of furious determination on her face. She didn't acknowledge Amir's absence. She just clapped her hands and announced, "Okay, team, big day. We have some challenges ahead, but I know that by coming together with positive energy, we can overcome anything." She was trying to project an aura of unshakable confidence, but her eyes were darting around nervously. The ship was sinking, and she was trying to fix it by telling everyone to smile more. I knew I had to do something. I followed her into her office and closed the door. "Caitlin, we need to talk," I said. "Case, I'm very busy right now, trying to reallocate resources after Amir's unprofessional decision to abandon the team," she said, not looking at me. "He didn't abandon the team," I said, my voice level. "He made a logical choice, and we need to face reality. Without Yosef and Amir, this project is dead in the water. We are facing a complete, total failure." She finally looked up at me, her face contorted with anger. "I am so tired of this negativity," she snapped. "This defeatist attitude is precisely the toxic mindset I am working to eliminate. They weren't team players. They were dinosaurs, unable to adapt to a new, more collaborative paradigm. We are better off without them." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like she was living in a different reality. "They weren't dinosaurs, Caitlin. They were the two most skilled engineers in this entire company. They were the ones holding this whole thing together. You drove them out. This failure, when it happens, will be on you." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me, Case?" "No," I said, a sudden sense of calm washing over me. "I'm resigning. You can consider this my 2 weeks' notice. Or, if you prefer, my 2 minutes' notice. I don't really care which." I had my letter of resignation already typed up. I placed it on her desk. For the first time, her mask of confidence shattered completely. A flicker of genuine panic flashed in her eyes. The anger was replaced by a raw, desperate fear. She had lost her buffer. She had lost the guy who translated her nonsense into reality. "You can't," she stammered. You're the team lead. Who will manage the project?" "That's a great question," I said. "You should probably form a committee to explore your feelings about it." I turned and walked out of her office, leaving her sitting there, staring at my resignation letter like it was a venomous snake. My walking out had an immediate effect. I went to my desk to start packing my personal items. A few colleagues came over to shake my hand quietly, whispering their support. The one I was most curious about was Fabian. He looked utterly broken. He'd followed the new rules. He'd been vulnerable. He'd been praised. And now he was sitting in the middle of a burning ruin, with no mentors, no leadership, and an impossible amount of work on his shoulders that he knew he couldn't handle. He came over to my desk as I was putting my photos in a box. "Are you really leaving?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I am," I said. "There's nothing left for me to do here." He looked around the office, at the empty chairs of Yosef and Amir, at the panicked faces of the other junior devs. "She told me I was the future of this team," he said, his voice cracking. "She said my emotional intelligence was more valuable than their rigid, old-fashioned way of thinking." "And do you feel valuable right now?" I asked him gently. He just shook his head, a single tear rolling down his cheek. He had been used. His ambition and his desire to please had been weaponized against the very people he admired. He was the poster boy for a failed ideology, and he was about to be the primary scapegoat. "They were always good to me," he said, talking about Yosef and Ahmir. "They taught me everything." "I know," I replied. I finished packing my box. As I walked towards the exit, I saw Fabian turn back to his computer. He opened a fresh document. He started typing. He was the last of us, and he was writing his own ticket out. Caitlin's panic truly set in when Fabian's resignation landed on her desk an hour after mine. The entire male technical core of the team was gone. In the span of about 48 hours, she had lost her senior architect, her senior engineer, her team lead, and her most promising junior dev. She was left with a handful of shell-shocked UI designers and a couple of terrified junior coders who couldn't tell a database schema from a grocery list. Project Odyssey, the multi-million-dollar flagship product, was now officially a ghost ship. Her first reaction was to lash out. She called an emergency meeting with the remaining staff and reportedly went on a long, rambling tirade about male fragility and how the men had run away from a challenge because they couldn't handle working under a strong female leader. No one bought it. They all knew the real reason. They had all seen it happen. Her next move was to try and hire replacements, urgently. The job postings went up online, seeking collaborative and emotionally attuned engineers. The descriptions focused almost entirely on soft skills and cultural fit, with the technical requirements listed as an afterthought. But the tech world is small. Word gets around. When recruiters started calling people, they heard the same story over and over. "Oh, that's the team where everyone just quit, right? No, thanks." No reputable engineer would touch that department with a 10-foot pole. It was radioactive. Meanwhile, the project was actively disintegrating. A critical server that Amir had maintained started throwing errors. No one knew the root password. Amir, in his infinite efficiency, had changed it a week prior for security reasons, and presumably the new one was in a handover document he never got to write. The entire system was locked. A major client called, wanting to see a demo of a feature that Yosef had been building. No one could find the source code. It was probably on his local machine, which had been wiped clean by IT the day he left. Caitlin was seen on the phone, screaming. She tried to order the remaining staff to just fix it, but they didn't have the skills. They didn't know the system. They were like battlefield medics being asked to perform brain surgery. The end came about 2 weeks after I left. The VP of product, the same guy from the disastrous meeting, scheduled a final review of Project Odyssey. It wasn't a review, it was an execution. I heard the story from my friend in HR who had a front row seat. Caitlin came in armed with a 30-page report detailing the campaign of sabotage conducted by me, Yosef, and Amir. She tried to paint herself as the victim of a coordinated sexist attack. The VP didn't even let her finish the first page. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a financial report. It showed the project's budget, the projected revenue, and the massive financial penalties the company would now have to pay for failing to deliver to their clients. The numbers were brutal, millions of dollars up in smoke. "Forget the sociology experiment, Caitlin," the VP said, his voice ice cold. "Explain this number to me. Explain the financial loss. Your job was to deliver a product. You have not only failed to deliver a product, you have systematically dismantled the very team that was capable of building it. You have turned a prized asset into a catastrophic liability." She tried to argue, to fall back on her buzzwords about culture and inclusivity. He cut her off. "I don't care about the culture. I care about the fact that our flagship product is a smoking crater in the ground. The culture you built is a culture of failure." They fired her on the spot. Security escorted her from the building. No restorative justice circle. No circle of trust. Just a cardboard box and a walk of shame out the front door. A few weeks later, the four of us met up at a quiet bar downtown. Me, Yosef, Amir, and Fabian. It was the first time we'd all been in the same room since the whole thing blew up. The mood wasn't somber. It was relieved. We were 4 survivors of a shipwreck, finally safe on dry land. Fabian looked like a different person. The nervous energy was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. He apologized for ever buying into Caitlin's garbage. Yosef just clapped him on the shoulder and told him, "You learned. That's all that matters." Amir, true to form, was mostly silent, but he was smiling, a genuine small smile. He just listened as the rest of us traded war stories. And we had some good news to share. A smaller, hungrier competitor company had heard about what happened. Their CTO, a no-nonsense engineer's engineer, had reached out to me. He said, "I heard you have a team of all-stars on the market. I don't care about drama. I care about building great software. Are you interested?" I told him the four of us came as a package deal. He didn't even hesitate. Done. He'd hired all of us. Not just hired us, but created a new special projects division for us to run. Gave me the official lead title, made Yosef and Akmir principal engineers with massive pay raises, and brought Fabian in on a fast-track mentorship program under them. He was giving us the resources to build our own Odyssey, but to do it right this time. We were all sitting there, with better jobs, better pay, and a future free of corporate nonsense. We had been through hell, but we had come out the other side stronger and more united than ever. We raised our glasses. Yosef, in a rare moment of eloquence, proposed the toast. He looked around at all of us, a grim but satisfied smile on his face. "To toxic masculinity," he said. We all drank to that,